What if the howl of the direwolf could echo again, not in myth or memory, but in the living world, larger and stronger than the gray wolf, lost to the Ice Age, but now standing at the edge of resurrection through the quiet hands of science? Close your eyes, and the dream of bringing the direwolf back to life. Before we begin, let me ask, where in the world are you listening from right now, and what time is it where you are? Asterisk, long ago, before roads carved the land and cities touched the sky, before the hum of engines or the flicker of electric light, there was a different silence. A silence filled with snow and starlight, a world of endless forests and windswept plains. And in that world, a shadow moved beneath the trees, heavy, low, and silent. A hunter, broad of skull and deep of chest, a wolf, but not the kind we know today. A direwolf. They roamed North and South America for hundreds of thousands of years. They were larger than modern wolves, more muscular, with massive jaws and teeth designed not just to bite, but to crush bones. They hunted bison, mammoths, and horses in packs, moving like whispers through frozen grass. And then, one day, they were gone. No one knows the exact moment the last direwolf disappeared, whether it died alone in the frost or surrounded by kin who would not see another winter. All we know is that when the Ice Age ended, the direwolf did not follow us into the warmth. It stayed behind, caught forever in the stillness of what was. But bones remained, and in tar pits and frozen caves and layers of ancient earth, we found them. Skulls with wide jaws and strong teeth, legs built for endurance, eyes that once saw through cold darkness. For years, we believed they were just oversized relatives of the gray wolf, close cousins, survivors from the same wild bloodline. But then science whispered something different. Geneticists took a deeper look, not at the shape of the bones, but at the code hidden inside them. The ancient DNA. It was damaged, as all ancient things are, but it still carried a song millions of years old. And when they listened, really listened, what they heard surprised them. The direwolf was not a wolf at all. It was something older, something stranger, a predator that resembled the wolf, not because it shared its blood, but because it lived in a world that demanded the same shape, the same strength, the same hunger. And so the question arose. Could it return? Not as a myth, not as a fantasy, but as a living, breathing creature. A resurrection not of belief, but of biology. Some call it de-extinction, others call it genetic resurrection. A process that sounds like fiction, but is slowly becoming possible. Not through magic, but through DNA, technology, and time. The idea is simple, though the process is not. If you can find enough genetic material from an extinct animal, and if you can sequence that material, and if you can find a living relative close enough to serve as a guide, then perhaps, just perhaps, you can bring that animal back. Not perfectly, not exactly, but closely enough that something once lost can move again through trees and snow and silence. With the direwolf, scientists are beginning to dream in this direction. Its DNA is damaged, but we have samples. Its strength, its way of hunting and living, is written in its bones. To resurrect a direwolf would be to rebuild that story, bit by bit, gene by gene. And this process has already begun with other animals. The woolly mammoth, for example, is being studied in the hope that its traits can be revived through the DNA of modern elephants. The passenger pigeon, the aurochs. These, too, are names whispered in the halls of quiet laboratories, where pale light shines on glass and steel, and memory is stitched into living strands. But resurrection is not just a matter of science. It is also a matter of meaning. Why do we want to bring these creatures back? Is it guilt? Is it wonder? With the direwolf, but to restore something deep in the human memory. Still, there are questions. Where would it live? What would it eat? Would it be truly wild, or only a replica? Would it be alone in a world that no longer belongs to it? Resurrection must be done with care, with humility, with reverence for what was, because life is not a machine, it is a rhythm, a song sung across time. And when we change the notes, we must do so gently, but the dream remains, of a shadow in the snow, of a low growl in the dark, of an ancient shape, moving once more beneath stars. The dire wolf may never return exactly as it was, but something like it might, something close enough to carry the flame forward, to remind us that extinction is not always the end. That memory, if held long enough, can become breath again, and maybe, in that breath, we will hear not only the voice of a predator, but the voice of the earth remembering itself. So rest now, let your thoughts curl like smoke in the cold, let your breath slow. The past does not always stay buried. Sometimes it lingers just beneath the surface, waiting to be touched again. In frozen soil, in tar-soaked fossils, in bones, resting beneath silent forests. The past is not lost, it is sleeping. And for the direwolf, it was the bones that spoke first. Massive skulls, heavy jaws, thick limb bones that suggested a creature made not for speed, but for strength, for power, for survival in a world that no longer exists. For many years, we believed these animals were simply giant gray wolves, a more muscular cousin that adapted to Ice Age conditions. We drew them into paintings, told stories of their fierce howls, imagined them chasing mammoths across frozen plains. But all we had was shape, and shape, though beautiful, can be deceiving. It was not until scientists turned to something deeper, to DNA, that the real story began to unfold. The process was slow. Ancient DNA degrades over time, breaking into fragments. It must be handled carefully, decoded, like a crumbling manuscript from a forgotten library. In labs, chilled and quiet, researchers began to read the code locked in the bones. What they found changed everything. The direwolf was not a wolf at all. It was something more ancient, a branch of the canine family tree that split off millions of years ago and evolved in near isolation, while wolves, coyotes, and jackals shared a more recent ancestor. The dire wolf's path diverged long before them. It became its own kind, similar in form, but different in blood. This was not a close cousin. This was a separate lineage. It had no modern relatives alive today. This discovery did more than correct a name. It deepened the mystery. How had such a distinct predator survived so long, only to vanish at the end of the Ice Age? And more importantly, could something so distant, so different, ever be brought back? To even consider resurrection, scientists must begin with the blueprint, the genome. For extinct animals, this is like rebuilding an entire book from scraps of burned paper. But the dire wolf gave us just enough. From fossilized remains in tar pits and permafrost, from bones held in quiet museum drawers, researchers sequenced its genome. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to know what it was and what it wasn't. Single quotes. This was not a gray wolf with big teeth. This was a ghost from a separate world, and yet, even ghosts leave fingerprints. Now, the question becomes, can those fingerprints be followed? The first step in de-extinction is not cloning, it is comparison. Scientists compare the genome of the extinct animal to that of its closest living relatives. With the dire wolf, this is harder. Its divergence from modern wolves means that even its cousins are distant. But there are still threads, bits of code that resemble those in gray wolves, in African wild dogs, even in jackals. Using these threads, researchers are beginning to imagine how they might reassemble traits: the dire wolf's massive jaw, its dense bone structure, its dark coat, its adaptations for cold. Not to replicate it exactly, but to reawaken something like it. This is not true resurrection. Not yet. It is hybridization. It is memory shaped into flesh through careful editing. And the tool they use is CRISPR, a method of editing genes with a precision that once seemed impossible. With CRISPR, scientists can insert, delete, and modify genetic material like an editor, rewriting ancient text. But rewriting nature is not simple. It requires patience. layers of review, ethical questions, ecological concerns, because to create a living creature from fragments of memory is not just science. It is responsibility. What kind of life would a recreated direwolf live? Would it be wild, or always watched? Would it roam in forests, or live behind fences? Would it know others like itself, or be alone in its kind? These questions do not yet have answers, but still the work continues. Because in the bones beneath the ice, in the DNA that still sings quietly, across time, there is something calling. Not a roar, not a howl, just a possibility, a flicker of what once was, asking to be seen again. And perhaps, in answering that call, we are not only reaching into the past, we are also learning what it means to care for the future. So rest now, let the wind blow softly through forgotten trees. Let the bones beneath the earth whisper their old names. The dire wolf may be gone, but its story is not finished, and somewhere in the stillness, something ancient waits to breathe again. To understand the dire wolf is to return to a world that no longer exists, a world of giants, of mammoths, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and endless plains of snow-covered grass. The Pleistocene was not a frozen wasteland. It was wild, vast, and alive, a theater of ancient life, moving beneath a colder sun, in a sky not so different from ours. The dire wolf was one of the most successful predators of that world. It did not walk alone. It walked with giants. It lived among creatures that today exist only in bone and story. Its territory stretched across both North and South America. From forests to open plains, from mountains to valleys, it adapted to conditions far more extreme than most modern wolves could endure. And what made the dire wolf thrive was not speed or cunning alone. It was power. Its body was built for force. Wide jaws, heavy limbs, a skull thicker than that of a gray wolf. When it bit to crush, not to pierce the skin and chase prey down with agility, but to bring down beasts much larger than itself. It likely hunted in packs, working with others to surround, to corner, to drag down prey too strong for a lone predator to kill. The prey it hunted were not small. There were ancient bison, taller and heavier than any we know now, giant ground sloths with claws longer than a man's arm, horses that thundered across valleys in herds, camels, mastodons, and mammoths, wool-clad towers of flesh and memory. The world was colder, but it was not empty. It was rich with life, and that richness required balance. Predators, like the dire wolf, played a role not of destruction, but of order. They kept herds moving. They tested the weak. They shaped the flow of energy across ecosystems. But the world was changing as the ice age came to its end. Temperatures began to rise. Slowly at first, then more rapidly. Glaciers retreated. Sea levels rose. The vegetation shifted. Prey animals began to disappear. Some were hunted to extinction by the earliest humans. Others simply failed to adapt to the new climate, and with them, the predators who depended on them began to vanish as well. The dire wolf held on longer than some. Its bones appear in late deposits, but eventually even it could not endure. Perhaps it ran out of food. Perhaps it could not compete with the more flexible gray wolves who moved in. Perhaps its powerful frame, once its greatest strength, became a burden in a changing world. What we know is this: the last dire wolf died over 10,000 years ago, but the landscape it once ruled still holds echoes of its presence in tar pits. Like La Brea in California, thousands of dire wolf bones have been recovered. Their jaws still locked in grim expressions, their teeth still strong, their skulls stained black from the slow drag of time. These are not just fossils. They are footsteps frozen in stone. They are memories the earth has not let go of. And when scientists touch those bones, when they extract fragments of DNA from their cores, they are not simply studying extinction. They are stepping into a rhythm that began long ago and may yet continue again. To walk in the footsteps of giants is not just to look backward. It is to ask what kind of future we are shaping. Because to bring back a species is not just an act of science. It is a question of place. Where would the dire wolf go? Could it thrive in a world of cities and roads and borders? Could it live again in wild reserves? Could it rejoin the forests from which it once vanished? Or would it remain forever outside of time, alive but displaced? These are not questions with easy answers, but they are questions worth asking, because in following the trail of the direwolf, we are reminded of how fragile the web of life truly is, how easily it can fray, how quickly even the strongest can fall when the world shifts beneath them. And perhaps in bringing such creatures back, not just in body, but in spirit, we learn how to tread more gently. We learn to see not just what was lost, but why it was lost, and we learn what it might take to protect what remains. So rest now, let the footsteps of giants echo softly in your thoughts. Let the snow fall in your imagination. Let the breath of the ice age move through the tall grass of memory. The direwolf once walked beside mammoths and saber-tooths and winds colder than memory, and perhaps with care, with patience, with reverence, it may walk again, not to conquer, but to remind us of the wild beauty this world once held, and may still hold again. Science can do many things now that once lived only in story. We can look into the heart of cells, rewrite the script of life, trace back the roots of extinction, and hold in our hands the genetic map of creatures that vanished thousands of years ago. But just because we can bring something back, does that mean we should? To ask whether the direwolf should return is not only to ask about DNA, it is to ask about responsibility, about ecosystems, about balance, and about memory. Resurrection sounds like magic, but it is not. It is biology, data, and intention. It begins with broken strands of ancient DNA. It moves through editing, through hosts, through birth, and if successful, it results in a living creature, one with breath, instinct, hunger, and need, not a symbol, not a myth, a living animal. So what kind of life would that animal live? Would it roam the wild, hunting again on snow-covered plains? Or would it live behind fences, watched and studied, protected but not free? Would it know others of its kind? Or would it be alone, a relic from a past that no longer fits? The questions run deep, because the resurrection of a species is also a reintroduction into a world that has moved on. The forests the dire wolf once ruled are smaller now. Roads cut through what were once migration routes. The great herds it once hunted have vanished. The balance of predators and prey has shifted, and even the climate has changed. Winters are shorter. Food webs are thinner. Territory is fragmented. And so we must ask, are we bringing the dire wolf back for itself, or for us? Because the desire to resurrect is not just scientific, it is emotional. It comes from a place of awe, of sorrow, of guilt. We look back and see a creature so powerful, so iconic, and we wish it had not been lost. And in that wishing, we wonder if we can undo the loss. But life is not something to be undone. It moves forward, and when we reach into the past, we must do so with care. The scientists working on de-extinction know this. They speak not of cloning for spectacle, but of restoring lost ecosystems, of returning balance, of righting ecological wounds. But even with the best intentions, the challenges remain. How many dire wolves would need to be created for a population to thrive? Who would raise them? Where would they learn to hunt? Could we ever recreate the world they once knew? And if not, what would they become? Some argue that bringing back extinct species is a distraction, that we should focus instead on saving the ones we still have, that money spent on ancient DNA could be used to protect endangered animals now. Others say the two goals are not opposed, that in learning how to bring back what was lost, we may better understand how to preserve what remains, and others still suggest that extinction is a part of nature, that trying to reverse it is unnatural. But this, too, must be examined closely, because many of the extinctions we mourn were not natural. They were caused by us, by hunting, by habitat loss, by pollution, by change we did not fully understand. And so the resurrection of the dire wolf becomes not only an experiment in science, but a mirror that reflects who we are and what kind of world we wish to build. Because to bring something back is to offer it a place, and that place must be more than a lab or a zoo. It must be a home, a landscape, a rhythm, a future. And if we are to create that, we must think not only about biology, but about compassion, not only about progress, but about purpose. What kind of relationship do we want with the life around us? Are we caretakers or creators? Are we healers or designers? These are not easy questions, but the act of asking them is part of what makes us human. And as we hold the possibility of the dire wolf's return in our hands, we are also holding a choice. The choice to remember, the choice to listen, the choice to move forward, not as conquerors of life, but as students of it. So sleep now. Let the weight of the question drift like snow on your shoulders. Let the forest return in your dreams. Let the deep growl of something ancient echo softly in the back of your mind. We do not yet know whether the dire wolf will rise again, but we do know this: if it does, it must not walk alone. It must walk beside a world that welcomes it gently, wisely, and with deep respect for all that came before. Bringing back a creature is one kind of miracle. Keeping it alive is another. But building a future for it, giving it the chance to grow, to multiply, to find its rhythm in the wild world once more, that is something different entirely. Resurrection is not complete with a single birth. It is only the beginning. For a species to live again, truly live, it must become more than one. It must become many. It must stretch into generations, into memory, into instinct, passed down not by story, but by blood. And so, the scientists begin to ask a new question: how do we turn one into a population? The first dire wolf, brought to life through fragments of ancient DNA, is alive. It walks, it eats, it howls, it lives, but it cannot carry the future alone. There must be others. Others shaped by the same delicate process, careful reconstruction, gene editing, the silent labor of scientists working between Petri dishes and time. More embryos are prepared, more hosts are chosen. Each one carries the weight of 1,000,000 years of silence, and yet, one by one, life stirs again. The newborns come with thick coats, strong jaws, broad shoulders. They blink into artificial light, but somewhere deep within them, something ancient stirs. Their instincts are not learned, but remembered. Their bodies move with a grace shaped by an environment that no longer exists. They are not copies, not clones. They are individuals, alive, hungry, curious, and slowly a pack begins to form. At first, they live behind fences, in reserves built not of concrete, but of careful balance. Places where the land has been left wild enough to teach, but safe enough to protect. Here, they begin to learn what it means to be wolves again. They learn through play, through challenge, through the low growls and sharp nips that define pack order. They are not alone. Scientists observe quietly, tracking every step. Biologists take notes on behavior. Ethicists watch to ensure dignity. Every choice is a question. How much human contact is too much? When do they need to be left alone? How do we help them become wild, without interfering with what that means? The goal is not to tame them, it is to let them become, because if they are to truly return, they must be able to survive without us, to hunt, to roam, to teach their young what the old bones cannot. And that is where the greatest challenge lies, not in the science, but in the scale. How many are needed to create a healthy population? 10, 50, hundreds. A population too small will collapse under its own genetic weight. Inbreeding will weaken it. Disease will spread. The past will crumble back into silence. But numbers alone are not enough. There must be space.territory.freedom. And that is harder to create than any strand of DNA. The world has changed. Highways cross the old hunting grounds. Farms now rest where mammoths once fell, and the ancient rhythm of predator and prey no longer moves the same. So those who dream of the dire wolf's return must also dream of the land that could hold it. They imagine vast protected ecosystems, wild corridors that link forest to forest, mountain to valley. Places where herds can run and predators can chase. Places not just to keep animals, but to let them live fully. This is not just conservation, it is restoration, rewilding not just a species, but an entire breath of time. And it is not easy. There are questions of politics, of ownership, of risk. What if the wolves leave the protected area? What if they come too close to cities? What if people are afraid? What if ecosystems no longer welcome them? And yet, despite these challenges, the vision remains, because life does not move backward, but it does carry echoes. And sometimes, if we listen, we can follow those echoes forward into something new, something wild, something whole. And so, the pack grows, from 1 to 2 to 10. Each pup born carries not just genes, but a legacy, a lineage lifted from the edge of memory. Their howls begin to blend, not just one voice, but many, not just a note in the dark, but a song, a chorus, a presence. And in that presence, a future begins to shape itself. The pups play, they fight. They chase, they stumble through streams, they dig into frozen soil, they explore the world, not as relics, but as real. And those who watch them, the scientists and dreamers and caretakers, do so with quiet hearts, because they know this is what hope looks like, not in speeches or headlines, but in fur and breath and paw prints in the dirt. The direwolf is no longer extinct, it is alive, and now, it must learn to belong again, not just in labs or archives or stories whispered before sleep, but in the land itself. So let your thoughts wander now. Let the wind move through tall grass in your mind. Let the sky grow cold and bright with stars. The pack is stirring, the forest is watching, and the legacy is being born, not just once, but again and again, in every pup, in every step, in every echo of the first howl that never truly ended. Bringing back a creature is one kind of miracle. Keeping it alive is another. But building a future for it, giving it the chance to grow, to multiply, to find its rhythm in the wild world once more, that is something different entirely. Resurrection is not complete with a single birth. It is only the beginning. For a species to live again, truly live, it must become more than one. It must become many. It must stretch into generations, into memory, into instinct, passed down not by story, but by blood. And so, the scientists begin to ask a new question. How do we turn one into a population? The first direwolf, brought to life through fragments of ancient DNA, is alive. It walks, it eats, it howls, it lives, but it cannot carry the future alone. There must be others. Others shaped by the same delicate process, careful reconstruction, gene editing, the silent labor of scientists working between petri dishes and time. More embryos are prepared, more hosts are chosen. Each one carries the weight of 1,000,000 years of silence, and yet, one by one, life stirs again. The newborns come with thick coats, strong jaws, broad shoulders. They blink into artificial light, but somewhere deep within them, something ancient stirs. Their instincts are not learned, but remembered. Their bodies move with a grace shaped by an environment that no longer exists. They are not copies, not clones. They are individuals, alive, hungry, curious, and slowly a pack begins to form. At first, they live behind fences, in reserves built not of concrete, but of careful balance. Places where the land has been left wild enough to teach, but safe enough to protect. Here, they begin to learn what it means to be wolves again. They learn through play, through challenge, through the low growls and sharp nips that define pack order. They are not alone. Scientists observe quietly, tracking every step. Biologists take notes on behavior. Ethicists watch to ensure dignity. Every choice is a question. How much human contact is too much? When do they need to be left alone? How do we help them become wild, without interfering with what that means? The goal is not to tame them, it is to let them become, because if they are to truly return, they must be able to survive without us, to hunt, to roam, to teach their young what the old bones cannot. And that is where the greatest challenge lies, not in the science, but in the scale. How many are needed to create a healthy population? 10, 50, hundreds. A population too small will collapse under its own genetic weight. Inbreeding will weaken it. Disease will spread. The past will crumble back into silence. But numbers alone are not enough. There must be space.territory.freedom. And that is harder to create than any strand of DNA. The world has changed. Highways cross the old hunting grounds. Farms now rest where mammoths once fell, and the ancient rhythm of predator and prey no longer moves the same. So those who dream of the dire wolf's return must also dream of the land that could hold it. They imagine vast protected ecosystems, wild corridors that link forest to forest, mountain to valley. Places where herds can run and predators can chase. Places not just to keep animals, but to let them live fully. This is not just conservation, it is restoration, rewilding not just a species, but an entire breadth of time. And it is not easy. There are questions of politics, of ownership, of risk. What if the wolves leave the protected area? What if they come too close to cities? What if people are afraid? What if ecosystems no longer welcome them? And yet, despite these challenges, the vision remains, because life does not move backward, but it does carry echoes. And sometimes, if we listen, we can follow those echoes forward into something new, something wild, something whole. And so, the pack grows, from 1 to 2 to 10. Each pup born carries not just genes, but a legacy, a lineage lifted from the edge of memory. Their howls begin to blend. Not just one voice, but many. Not just a note in the dark, but a song, a chorus, a presence. And in that presence, a future begins to shape itself. The pups play, they fight. They chase, they stumble through streams, they dig into frozen soil, they explore the world, not as relics, but as real. And those who watch them, the scientists and dreamers and caretakers, do so with quiet hearts, because they know this is what hope looks like, not in speeches or headlines, but in fur and breath and paw prints in the dirt. The direwolf is no longer extinct, it is alive, and now, it must learn to belong again, not just in labs or archives or stories whispered before sleep, but in the land itself. So let your thoughts wander now. Let the wind move through tall grass in your mind. Let the sky grow cold and bright with stars. The pack is stirring, the forest is watching, and the legacy is being born, not just once, but again and again, in every pup, in every step, in every echo of the first howl that never truly ended. A wolf alone is a shadow. A wolf in a pack is a presence, but a wolf in the wild, moving through forests, following ancient trails beneath stars, that is something else entirely. That is a memory walking again. That is history with breath. If the dire wolf is to truly return, it cannot remain behind fences. It must feel the wind across open valleys. It must chase. It must roam. It must howl beneath skies untouched by city lights. And that journey from lab to land is the next great step in the story. This is called rewilding. It is more than release. It is restoration. It is the careful, quiet rebuilding of places where wild rhythms once moved freely, not just for one species, but for all. And if the dire wolf is to be rewilded, the question becomes, where? The ancient lands it once ruled are different now. Once, the dire wolf moved across the Americas, from the tip of Alaska to the forests of South America. It hunted mammoths on ice plains and bison on grasslands. But those lands are no longer untouched. Roads cross them, farms cover them, Cities pulse across the old trails. Still, some places remain. Remote forests, protected parks, mountain ranges where herds still graze and rivers still run without dams. And in these places, a possibility stirs. Could the dire wolf walk here again? Not as an invader, but as a native, returning to where it once belonged. The answer lies not just in space, but in balance. A predator cannot live without prey. A pack cannot thrive without territory. And an ecosystem must be ready to hold a species not seen in 10,000 years. So the scientists begin to study. They map terrain. They model populations. They speak with ecologists, with conservationists, with indigenous communities. Because to rewild is not only a biological task, it is a cultural one. It is political. It is spiritual. It requires listening to the land and to those who live with it. Some are excited. They dream of hearing howls again in the night, of knowing that something ancient has returned. They see the dire wolf not as danger, but as healing, as a symbol of what might be restored. Others are cautious. They fear the unknown. They worry about livestock, about safety, about cost, and their voices matter. Because rewilding must be done with care, not from above, not from far away, but in partnership with those who know the ground beneath their feet. So the work begins, slowly, deliberately. Corridors of wild land are connected. Prey populations are monitored. Fencing is considered and sometimes removed. Plans are drawn not just in theory, but with dirt under fingernails. And eventually, the day arrives. A handful of dire wolves, born in quiet enclosures, are brought to the edge of the wild. They are not released recklessly. They are watched, guided, supported in subtle ways. And as they step beyond the boundaries, something stirs in the landscape. Birds go quiet. Deer lift their heads. The wind carries a new scent, and the wolves move, not like prisoners, freed, but like memories returning. They find old trails. They mark territory. They test their legs on rough ground. They move in pairs, in threes, in packs. And in time, they hunt, not in cages, not in simulations, but for real. Their jaws close on prey. Their feet press into soil. Their breath rises like mist in the morning. And suddenly, the ecosystem begins to respond. This is the part few understand, that predators do not destroy balance. They create it. Their presence reshapes everything. Prey become more alert. More mobile vegetation recovers. Where overgrazing once reigned, other animals adapt. New dynamics form. It is not just rewilding the wolves, it is rewilding the world around them. And we begin to see it, the landscape becoming whole, not in the way it once was, but in a new way, a shared way, a way that includes memory and motion and presence. There will be challenges. Some wolves may leave the protected zones. Some may not survive. Some may clash with the new world in ways we could not predict. But still, they will move. Still, they will learn. Still, they will teach. And in their motion, we will remember what it means to let something live freely, not as exhibit, not as experiment, but as being so. Rest now. Let your thoughts wander to the edge of a forest, where fog rolls gently over pine needles. Let your ears hear the faint crack of a twig, the breath of something large, just beyond sight. Let your mind drift with the pack, following trails no human foot has touched. The dire wolf is no longer a whisper, it is presence, and with every step, it is rewilding the future. Not all memory lives in the mind. Some memories live in the bones, in the silence between heartbeats, in the shape of a shadow, in the echo of a howl across a sleeping valley. The dire wolf is not remembered only through science. It is remembered through feeling, through stories, through symbols passed quietly from generation to generation. A shape we've never seen, but somehow still recognize, even long after its extinction. The dire wolf lingered in our imagination. Its bones were buried, but its presence was not. It slipped into our myths, into the deep growl in the dark, into the primal fear that lives just beyond firelight, and into our longing, a longing for something wilder than ourselves. A creature not tamed, not broken, not softened by walls and rules and roads. A creature that knows what we have forgotten. In many cultures, the wolf is a teacher, a pathfinder, a watcher between worlds. Not evil, not a villain, but a mirror. It watches us from the edge of the trees, from dreams, from symbols carved into stone. And in that watching, it reflects something back: strength, loyalty, silence, wildness. The dire wolf, larger and more powerful than any wolf alive today, carried all of this and more. It was not just a predator, it was a force, a rhythm of nature, so old that it shaped entire ecosystems around it. And when it vanished, something went quiet inside the land, and maybe inside us. To bring the dire wolf back is not just to restore an animal, it is to reopen a story. A story we've been telling ourselves since before history, of the forest and the flame, of fear and freedom, of the line between the known and the unknowable. That story lives in our bones, too. And when we hear the howl, even if it's the recreated howl of a newly born pack, even if it's shaped by scientists and sculpted by code, something stirs, something older than language, something that says, we remember you, even if we never met. And maybe the wolf remembers us, not through thought, not through memory in the way we understand it, but through motion, through instinct, through the way it looks at us, not with fear, not with love, but with knowing. Because the wolf does not care for our machines. It does not need our approval. It does not bow. It does not break. And that is what makes it sacred. It remains untouched, a symbol of the world before control, before clocks, before fences. And in its return, we feel a kind of healing, a reconnection. Because for so long, we have been moving away from the wild, and the wild, in turn, has stepped back. But the dire wolf is a bridge. A reminder that not everything that disappears is gone, that the flame beneath the ashes can still glow, that the howl still echoes if we listen closely enough. So what does the wolf remember? It remembers the cold of the ice age, the thunder of hooves on frozen plains, the crack of bones beneath powerful jaws. It remembers the curve of the hunt, the rhythm of the pack, the silence between snowflakes, and maybe, just maybe, it remembers us. The humans on the edge of the fire, the hunters, the watchers, the storytellers, the ones who followed footprints, the ones who drew wolves in ochre on cave walls, the ones who, even then, could not forget. This is why the dire wolf matters, not just because of what it was, but because of what it still means. In its eyes, we see the world we once lived in. In its steps, we see the trail we lost. And in its howl, we hear the question we've always been asking: what does it mean to be wild, and can we ever return? The dire wolf will never be fully ours. It was not made for cages, not shaped for comfort. It is a creature of motion, of breath, and instinct, and deep knowing. And in bringing it back, we must be careful not to tame it, not to mold it into something we control, but to let it be what it always was. So sleep now. Let the fire burn low. Let the trees sway gently in your mind. You are not alone in the night. Somewhere, in the quiet, a wolf walks, not behind you, not in front, but beside you, as it always has. As it always will. Something unsettling, almost sacred, about living in a world where the past and the present blur. And when we bring something back, when we resurrect a creature from where ghosts are allowed to walk again, the dire wolf is not just an animal. It is a memory made flesh. It is the whisper of the wild world we lost, not as a dream, but as a presence. It is the echo of a time when our ancestors might have crossed paths with it in the cold of a fading world. When the air was thin with snow and the ground thick with ice. When predators and prey moved in a rhythm we can no longer feel. And in resurrecting the dire wolf, we do not just awaken a beast, we awaken a story that has lived within us, not just in our history, but in our imagination. For even when the dire wolf was gone, it never truly left. It stayed with us in the howl of the wind, in the shadow of the mountains, in the dark corners of our dreams. How do we walk with ghosts? How do we live in a world where the past is not just a fading memory, but something real, something breathing, something moving beside us once more? To walk with ghosts is to be constantly aware of the present moment, knowing it is shaped by forces unseen, by stories told and untold. It is to feel the weight of memory, not as a burden, but as a guide. It is to see the world, not just for what it is, but for what it once was, and what it could be again. The return of the dire wolf is not a return to the past. It is not a perfect replication of what once was. It is a reminder that the past is never truly gone. It is in the bones we carry, in the stories we tell, in the land we tread upon. And when we bring back a creature like the dire wolf, we are not just reintroducing it to the landscape. We are reintroducing ourselves to the wild, to the forgotten rhythms of the world. The dire wolf will never live in the same world it once knew. The forests have changed. The herds are smaller. The climate is warmer. But it will live in a world where its legacy is carried forward in our wonder, in our reverence, in our responsibility to the land. And maybe that is where the true power of resurrection lies, in walking with ghosts. We learn to listen more carefully. We learn to feel the connections between past and present, between memory and reality. We learn that the stories we tell, the lives we live, are not separate from the land, from the animals, from the spirits of what came before. When we are reconnecting with the wildness that still beats within us. The desire to witness something larger than ourselves. The yearning to understand the patterns that shape the world. To find meaning in the spaces between what is and what could be. But with this resurrection comes responsibility. The dire wolf is not just a symbol. It is a living, breathing creature. It has instincts. It has needs. It has a place in the world that we must honor. We cannot simply pull it from the past and expect it to fit into our present world as if nothing has changed. We must ask ourselves, what does it mean to walk beside the past? What does it mean to bring something back, not just for us, but for the world it once belonged to? To live with ghosts is to acknowledge the weight of history, the weight of consequence, the weight of all that came before. It is to walk gently, to tread carefully, to make space for things that are not ours to control, but ours to protect. So when the first pack of dire wolves steps into the wild again, it will not be a victory. It will be a beginning of a new story, a story that began long ago, but continues now, in the stillness of the night, in the silence between howls, in the echoes of the past that move across the present like shadows in the snow. The dire wolf is not a ghost. It is alive, and in that life, we are reminded that the wild is not gone. It is waiting, it is watching, it is listening, and perhaps it is waiting for us to listen. So sleep now. Let the shadows of the past move through your dreams. Let the reminder of what once was, and what still can be. The wilderness has always known how to heal itself. Given time, given space, given the freedom to move and breathe and grow, it reweaves its balance. Rivers reshape land. Forests regrow where fire once passed. Predators return to guide the rhythm of prey. But sometimes the land waits. A song that once held the wild together, now missing from the chorus. The dire wolf was once part of that song. A sound not only of presence, but of purpose. It was more than communication. That reminds balance to return. That reminds silence what sound can mean. And now, after 10,000 years, that howl might rise again, not in cages, not in laboratories, but in the wilderness itself. Imagine it. You are standing at the edge of a pine forest just before dawn. The trees are still. The air is cold. A low, rising note that trembles gently through the trees. One voice, then another, then a third. A call that does not ask for attention. It simply exists. Proud, ancient, whole. It is not a ghost. It is a new beginning, a new howl in the wilderness. The The return of the direwolf is more than a scientific achievement. It is the return of a keystone, a creature that once shaped entire ecosystems through its presence. With its strong jaws and wide range, it helped regulate prey populations. It kept herds alert and moving. It shifted grazing patterns, which in turn shaped plant life, water flow, soil health, and the survival of other species. Predators do not exist to threaten the balance. They are the balance, and in bringing them back, we do not create chaos. We restore complexity. The wild is not just a space. It is a system. Every howl, every paw print, every breath of an animal that lives in that space adds to the web. And the dire wolf, with its strength, its endurance, its ancient memory, could once again become a thread in that web, not to dominate, but to anchor it. Of course, the land has changed. The wilderness is not as wide as it once was. Highways cut through migration routes. Farms fill open plains. Noise blurs the edges of silence. But even here, in the fragments of old forest, in the reserves and rewilded lands, in the mountains and forgotten valleys, there is space. And in that space, there is potential. The dire wolf does not need the entire continent to thrive. It needs breathing room. It needs connection. It needs a chance. And if we offer that, something beautiful begins to happen. The land responds. Prey populations adapt. Vegetation stabilizes. Birds return. Rivers flow more clearly as plant roots hold the soil. The entire system becomes more alive, not because of what we added, but because of what we allowed to return. And the people, those who live near these places, begin to feel it too. The idea that something wild and ancient, that in this place, on this land, something thought to be lost forever, walks again. Some will fear it. That is natural. We fear what we do not fully understand. But with education, with experience, with patience, that fear softens into respect, into wonder, into the realization that we are not alone in shaping the earth, that we are not meant to be alone. The dire wolf will not fix everything. It is not a solution. It is a symbol, a first step, a howl in the darkness that says we can begin again. And perhaps that is the most powerful part of its return. Not that we brought it back, but that we listened, that we cared, that we chose to walk differently across the land, not as owners, but as participants, not as rulers, but as stewards. So, sleep now. Let your thoughts wander to distant forests and misty hills. Let the sound of a low, distant howl settle into your chest. The wild is not gone. It is waiting. And in that waiting, something ancient begins to rise. A new howl, a new story, a new future, and you are part of it. Some stories we tell to remember the world. Others we tell to remember ourselves. And sometimes those stories are the same, because the creatures we study, the bones we hold, the voices we try to bring back from silence, they are more than subjects of science. They are mirrors, and the direwolf is one of the oldest mirrors we have ever faced. We see its power, its endurance, its survival through ice and storm, and we admire it. We see its teeth and its strength and its pack, and we fear it. But beneath those instincts, something deeper stirs a feeling we cannot quite name. Because when we look at the direwolf, we are not only seeing the past, we are seeing ourselves. Not the part of us that builds and calculates, but the part that runs, the part that listens to the wind before speaking, the part that belongs to the land without needing to explain why, the part that remembers being wild. The direwolf is not just a creature of bone and code. It is a symbol of something we carry inside us, even now. That strength, that silence, that way of knowing the world through breath and motion, not through words. And in bringing the dire wolf back, we are not just reviving a species. We are returning to a reflection we had long turned away from. In the polished surfaces of modern life, we rarely see the wild self, the part of us that once knelt by streams and tracked the shape of prey through mud. The part that slept beneath stars without walls. The part that knew how to watch the horizon, not for worry, but for rhythm. The direwolf remembers that, not in thought, but in form, and when we stand near it, whether in forests or in dreams, we feel that memory awaken. We are not so different from the wolf. We, too, are shaped by time and struggle and instinct. We, too, know what it means to follow a trail, to fight for the ones we love, to long for something beyond ourselves. The wolf lives in the moment, but it moves with the weight of its lineage. And so do we. When the dire wolf looks back at us, through recreated eyes, through the hush of dawn, through a howl that sounds both ancient and new, we must ask what it sees. Does it see a stranger, a creator, a companion, a threat, or something more subtle, a reflection? Because we have always seen the wolf in our myths. We have given it meaning, we have feared it, we have worshipped it, and perhaps we have always sensed that it holds something we've forgotten. Not power, not dominance, but presence. The ability to live fully in the world as it is, not distracted, not detached, but rooted, and maybe, in bringing back the dire wolf, we are asking to be rooted again, to feel the forest floor underfoot, to feel the cold and not retreat, to feel the fire and not forget its warmth, to be alive, not just in mind, but in body and breath. This is what the wolf teaches us. It does not speak, it does not explain. It lives, it moves, it watches, and in doing so, it reminds us that there is more to being human than thought alone. There is rhythm, there is stillness, there is the knowledge of the land that needs no words, there is the quiet kind of strength that comes not from control, but from belonging. The dire wolf was never tame, it lived on its own terms, and now, in its return, it offers no promises, no easy lessons, just a presence, just a mirror. So we can ask ourselves, what do we see when we look at it, and what would it see if it looked back? The answer may not come in this moment, it may not come in words at all, but you will feel it in your breath, in your spine, in the space behind your thoughts, of remembering that you, too, are part of this earth, that you, too, are shaped by wind and shadow, that you, too, carry a wildness worth honoring. So rest now. Let the mirror be clear. Let the wolf walk with you, not behind, not ahead, but beside. You are not apart from the wild. You are its echo, its twin, its reflection, and the wolf remembers so. Now, so do you. A legacy does not live in one body alone. It moves like a current, flowing quietly through time, from parent to child, from silence to sound, from the breath of the old into the first cry of the new. It carries more than traits. It carries memory. It carries meaning. And for the dire wolf, that meaning is just beginning to take root again. Because resurrection is not just the birth of one, it is the birth of many, and those many are not born in labs anymore. They are born in nests of fur and warmth, in dens shaped by instinct, in forests where no blueprint guides them, only the rhythm of something older than thought. This is how a species begins again, not through announcements, not through headlines, but through generations, through mothers licking their pups clean in the stillness of early morning, through tiny bodies squirming toward milk, blind but certain, through the first steps, the first growls, the first playful bites that carry lessons too old to be written. Each pup is a step away from extinction and a step into life. They do not know they were once gone. They do not know that bones of their ancestors rest beneath museums or tar. They know only now, only the cold of stone, the scent of siblings, the warmth of breath from the one who gave them life. And that is enough, because this is where resurrection becomes something greater than science. It becomes natural again. It becomes normal. A mother teaching her pups to watch the wind, a father pacing nearby, guarding the edge of the den, a pack slowly taking shape not in code, but in contact, in rhythm, in loyalty. This is not replication, this is rebirth. Each pup is unique. Some grow tall and strong like the old wolves once were, some smaller, some with jaws just slightly broader, eyes just slightly darker. The bloodline is not perfect, but it is alive, And in that aliveness, something sacred stirs, because the earth does not require perfection to hold you. It requires presence. It requires movement. It requires continuity. And the dire wolves, now growing in number, are learning how to move in the world again. They are not trained. They are not tamed. They are guided by each other, by touch, by play, by the subtle corrections of the pack. And slowly, they become more than a reintroduction. They become a lineage, a flow, a river of instinct that once dried up, now moving again. The scientists step back. They no longer intervene in every motion. They observe, they record, they listen, because the wolves are telling their own story now, and it is not one of science anymore. It is one of life. Some of the pups grow to lead. They guide others on the hunt. They choose when to rest, when to follow, when to wait. Some become mothers, curling protectively around the next generation. And in those new eyes, the second generation, born not from lab, but from life, the wolf becomes something whole again. The dire wolf is no longer a recovery project. It is a presence. It is a heartbeat in the wild. It is teeth sunk into prey, not as violence, but as survival. It is howling, not in test enclosures, but into open sky. It is bone meeting earth, not as artifact, but as anchor. And what began with fossil and theory now moves through muscle and breath. The bloodline deepens, and with it, the memory of the world before returns. Not perfectly, not fully, but enough to stir the land, enough to shift the prey. Enough to thicken the forests once thinned by imbalance. This is not restoration as imitation. This is recreation as unfolding. And the wolves, they do not know how miraculous they are. They do not know they were once a whisper in the bones. They do not know they were stitched together by the hands of patient minds. They only know the call of the pack, the scent of fresh snow, the shape of the river beneath the moon. And perhaps that is the miracle, that what we feared extinct has become ordinary again. Not ordinary in value, but ordinary in rhythm. A creature among others, neither idle nor experiment, just alive, fully, softly, fiercely. So, sleep now. Let your thoughts walk through the den, quiet and warm. Let the rhythm of breath and paw and heartbeat fill the silence. The bloodline is not broken. It flows again, not from the past, but into the future. And with every pup born under stars, the dire wolf is no longer returning. It has already returned. The wild has no classrooms, no chalk, no books, no spoken instructions. And yet, everything within it learns. Every paw, every wing. For the young dire wolves, born into a world that has almost forgotten them, learning does not come from history, comes from the snow beneath their feet. The snow is both teacher and test. It does not explain, but it reveals. It reveals the weight of a body, the softness of a step, the difference between stillness and stalking. It carries scent across the ground like a whisper. It muffles sound and sharpens silence. In snow, every mistake is seen. Every success is earned. And so, the pups begin their lessons. They chase each other across open meadows. They leap too soon. They slide on hidden ice. They tumble into drifts. They bark at shapes they do not yet understand. But in every movement, they grow more certain. Their bodies begin to stretch into purpose. Their paws grow steady. Their tails carry confidence. Their ears twitch, not with confusion, but with attention. The older wolves do not speak. They do not lecture, but they teach all the same. They slow their pace, so the young can follow. They circle back when one falls behind. They nudge them away from danger with nothing more than a look. And when it is time to hunt, the patience, because hunting is not just pursuit, it is presence. It is knowing the wind, the rhythm of the herd, the sound of hooves on distant ground. And slowly, the pups begin to understand. They begin to move with more care. They begin to lower their heads when approaching prey. They begin to mimic the movements of the ones who came before. This is not instinct alone. It is instinct refined by the land. It is what happens when memory meets experience. because even if these dire wolves are born from a second beginning, they are learning the world as it is now, not the ice age, not the era of mammoths and ancient bison, but this time, this forest, these valleys, these skies, and in learning it, they become part of it, not as relics, not as strangers, but as participants, as students, as storytellers in motion. The snow carries their prints long after they've passed, and in those prints, around them, small mammals alter their tunnels and trails. The trees, untouched by paws or claws, are changed because the balance they grew in begins to shift again. The presence of a predator reshapes everything, and it does so gently, not through. Grasses begin to recover, and so the lessons extend beyond the pack. The land itself begins to learn them again. What it means to grow under watchful eyes, what it means to move through a food web, no longer missing a thread. The young wolves, to grow, they stumble less, they bite harder in play. They stop waiting for others to lead. They begin to lead. They test the boundaries of the forest. They follow scents into places untouched by any living direwolf for 10,000 years. And sometimes they stop. They lift their heads. What they feel is recognition. Something deep, something old. The snow does not speak, but it remembers. It remembers the rhythm of paws long gone, and in the return of the wolf step, the wolves write their story into it. Not a copy of the past, but something new, something shaped by what came before, but open to what comes next. And in this openness, the young wolves learn more than how to hunt. They learn how to belong, not as survivors, but as continuers. They are not relics. They are not experiments. They are what happens when life listens closely to what was lost, decides it can still matter. They are what happens when the land becomes teacher again. So sleep. Like wind curling through trees, you do not need to understand every lesson, only to feel it, the way the wolves do, the way the land does, the way the world does, when it is finally whole enough to teach again. Some stories do not end with a final act. They continue through silence, through seasons, through small, unseen moments that shape the future. The resurrection of the dire wolf began with DNA, with questions, with awe. But its true success lies not in the spectacle of its return, but in the quiet that follows, in the steady gaze of those who choose to stay and watch. This is the long watch. It does not call for celebration. It calls for care. The wolves now live. They hunt, they howl, they raise their young beneath trees and sky. But life, once returned, is not automatic. It must be protected. It must be understood. It must be given the time and space to settle back into the land, not as a guest, but as something native once again. And so, the humans remain, not as masters, not as controllers, but as guardians of a delicate balance. They build no walls. They set no traps. They do not interfere unless they must. Instead, they listen. They walk the trails the wolves now roam, leaving no footprints. They place cameras deep in the trees to track movement without intrusion. They study scat, fur, footprints, and calls, not to control the wolves, but to learn from them, to know them. To remember that bringing something back is not the same as letting it live, and letting it live is the harder task, because rewilding is never truly finished. It is not a moment. It is a process, a commitment, a watch that stretches over years. Sometimes the wolves wander too far. They pass into lands where the wild is no longer welcome. A rancher finds signs. A farmer hears howls in the night. And once again, the old fear stirs. The fear of the predator. The fear of the unknown. The long watchers know this, and they are ready. They meet the fear with truth, with patience, with presence. They speak not of danger, but of balance. They show that the wolves do not kill more than they need, that they keep the deer populations healthy, that they bring life to the land, not by domination, but by rhythm. And slowly, very slowly, the communities near the wolves begin to see something shift. Where there was suspicion, there is now curiosity. Where there was silence, There are now questions, and sometimes, just sometimes, there is awe. A child hears a howl from the edge of the forest and smiles. Instead of shrinking, an elder who remembers stories of wildness from childhood now sees them walk again through trees. A new kind of respect begins to grow, not just for the wolves, but for the work it took to bring them back. Because the wolves are no longer a project, they are a presence. And like any presence worth protecting, they require witnesses, not always scientists, not always experts, but people who care enough to look up from the immediate and into the long horizon. This is the long watch. It is not always easy. Storms come, packs split, a virus may sweep through the wild and test the strength of the bloodline. But the watchers remain. They observe, they adjust, they wait, because they understand. Resurrection is not a finish line. It is a beginning that must be renewed each day. It is a promise made not to one generation of wolves, but to all that will follow. And in time, the wolves will no longer need them. They will live on their own, beyond the reach of record, beyond the boundary of study. They will become wild, in full again, and the watchers, they will let go, not as failure, but as fulfillment. Because to bring something back, and to trust it enough to live without you, is the final act of reverence. The wolves do not know they are being watched. They only know the forest, the prey, the pack. But the watchers know, and they watch not for control, but for continuity. So sleep now. Let your thoughts stand quietly in the snow, beside a motionless figure. Let your breath slow with the hush of distant howls. The wolves have returned, and so has the one who watches, not to interfere, not to own, but to ensure that what was once lost need never be lost again. There is a moment in every great story when the line between reality and myth begins to blur, not because truth is fading, but because something greater is rising in its place. The dire wolf began as a fact, a skull in the dirt, a jaw built to crush bone, a name written in the quiet language of extinction. Then it became a theory, then a possibility. And now it breathes again. But as it lives, it also begins to shift, not into fantasy, but into something even older. Legend. The dire wolf does not ask for this. It simply walks. It lives in forests and along ridgelines, in the hush of snowfields, in places where the moonlight touches branches no human hand has bent. But people begin to tell stories again. Stories whispered in cabins and at campfires. Stories murmured on long drives past tree-lined roads. Stories where truth is not broken, but softened. They say the wolves move like smoke, that their eyes reflect stars older than time, that one howl can quiet a valley, that they're not just animals, but a returning spirit. And in a way, they are not because they're magical, but because they remind us of something we thought only stories could hold. They remind us that the past does not stay buried, that wonder can be rebuilt, that memory can become breath. In villages near the forests, children begin to draw them, huge, dark, and strong. Schools read about their return. Scientists visit to share what they've learned, and leave with more questions than answers. And the people who once feared them now watch the woods with curiosity instead of dread. They wait for a glimpse, a print in the mud, a shadow slipping between trees, a howl that stops the heart, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing you are hearing something that shouldn't exist, and yet does. This is how legends return, not as illusions, but as truth seen through wonder. The dire wolf becomes more than species. It becomes symbol. It becomes reminder that we are capable of healing what was broken, that the divide between wild and human is not a wall, but a thin veil, one that lifts, if only for a moment. When something ancient looks back at us from the edge of the trees, the old stories begin to shift. To Dot, where once the dire wolf was seen only as danger, it is now seen as balance, as power without cruelty, as strength without corruption. It is no longer the beast that stalks us in the dark. It is the voice that calls us back to the forest, And as the years pass, the wolves grow in number. They move beyond the boundaries of the first protected lands. They form packs no scientist has tagged, no camera has seen. And in those packs, the myth lives freely. Some will never see them. Some will doubt they exist at all. But others, hikers, farmers, dreamers, will feel them in a flicker of movement, in a sound at dusk, in the feeling of being watched, not with threat, but with recognition. And that recognition is what matters. Because we know now that what once lived only in imagination can live again in truth. We know now that legends can walk again, not in dreams, but on earth. And so the dire wolf, once a fossil, once a ghost, becomes something more eternal, not just science, not just story, but both intertwined, alive. So rest now. Let the forest close in gently around your mind. Let your breath slow with the quiet of branches above snow. You have walked with legend. You have seen the past rise into the present. And now, in the space between truth and tale, the dire wolf runs on. There is a moment in every great story when the line between reality and myth begins to blur. Not because truth is fading, but because something greater is rising in its place. The dire wolf began as a fact, a skull in the dirt, a jaw built to crush bone, a name written in the quiet language of extinction. Then it became a theory, then a possibility, and now it breathes again. But as it lives, it also begins to shift, not into fantasy, but into something even older. Legend. The dire wolf does not ask for this. It simply walks. It lives in forests, in places where the moonlight touches branches no human hand has bent. But people begin to tell stories again. Stories whispered in cabins and at campfires. Stories murmured on long drives past tree-lined roads. Stories where truth is not broken, but softened. They say the wolves move like smoke, that their eyes reflect stars older than time, that one howl can quiet a valley, that they're not just animals, but a returning spirit. And in a way, they are not because they're magical, but because they remind us of something we thought only stories could hold. They remind us that the past does not stay buried, that wonder can be rebuilt, that memory can become breath. In villages near the forests, children begin to draw them, huge, dark, and strong. Schools read about their return. Scientists visit to share what they've learned and leave with more questions than answers. And the people who once feared them now watch the woods with curiosity. Instead of dread, they wait for a glimpse, a print in the mud, a shadow slipping between trees, a howl that stops the heart, not with fear, but with the weight of knowing you are hearing something that shouldn't exist, and yet does. This is how legends return, not as illusions, but as truth seen through wonder. The dire wolf becomes more than species. It becomes symbol. It becomes reminder that we are capable of healing what was broken, that the divide between wild and human is not a wall, but a thin veil, one that lifts, if only for a moment. When something ancient looks back at us from the edge of the trees, the old stories begin to shift. Where once the dire wolf was seen only as danger, it is now seen as balance, as power without cruelty, as strength without corruption. It is no longer the beast that stalks us in the dark. It is the voice that calls us back to the forest. And as the years pass, the wolves grow in number. They move beyond the boundaries of the first protected lands. They form packs no scientist has tagged, no camera has seen. And in those packs, the myth lives freely. Some will never see them. Some will doubt they exist at all, but others, hikers, farmers, dreamers, will feel them in a flicker of movement, in a sound at dusk, in the feeling of being watched, not with threat, but with recognition. And that recognition is what matters. Because we know now that what once lived only in imagination can live again in truth. We know now that legends can walk again, not in dreams, but on earth. And so the dire wolf, once a fossil, once a ghost, becomes something more eternal. Not just science, not just story, but both. intertwined, alive. So rest now. Let the forest close in gently around your mind. Let your breath slow with the quiet of branches. Rise into the present. And now, in the space between truth and tale, the dire wolf runs on. Every creature carries a story written in code. Not the kind you read with your eyes, but the kind you feel through time. Each twist in the spiral of DNA, each silent instruction tucked into a strand of memory, tells a tale of survival, of change, of what once was and what might still be. And in the dire wolf, that code runs deep. It is more than muscle or bone, more than shape or instinct. It is a map of endurance, a record of winters survived and prey hunted, of ice ages crossed, of worlds lost and rebuilt. When scientists first cracked the genome of the dire wolf, they didn't just find the past, they found a key to an entire branch of life that had once moved alongside modern wolves, yet apart. A lineage that split millions of years ago and took its own path through evolution. A path that left no modern descendants until now. Because when the dire wolf returned, it brought its code with it. Lines of genetic history once frozen in bone now walked again on four legs. The genome was no longer silent. It was breathing, learning, shaping life once more, and the scientists who once studied it from behind glass now saw it leap through the forest, hunting, resting, raising young, proving that the code was more than theory. It was presence, it was function, it was proof that the book of life, if held long enough, could still be read aloud. And within that genome are answers to questions we have barely begun to ask. Why did the dire wolf grow larger than the gray wolf? How did it survive in colder climates? Why did it die out while others endured? Its DNA holds pieces of these mysteries, genes tied to muscle growth, to metabolism, to cold resistance, to social behavior, to scent and sound. Each gene, a letter, each chromosome, a chapter, each wolf, a library, walking through the world again. But it's not only the dire wolf that benefits from this. Other species do too, because by reading the dire wolf's code, we learn more about the broader canine family. We learn how evolution twists and turns, how adaptation shapes form and function, how two animals can look alike, yet be worlds apart in their lineage. And in those differences, we find tools that may one day help us understand disease, tools that may help us protect endangered species, tools that might one day allow us to guide evolution, not recklessly, but with reverence. Because the dire wolf was not brought back simply to walk again. It was brought back to teach, to show what happens when memory becomes matter, to remind us that extinction is not always the end, and that DNA, if preserved, can hold the breath of life within it for millennia. Still, the genome is not perfect. It carries scars, gaps, errors formed by time, by degradation, by the slow unraveling of what was once whole. But with modern tools, we stitch those pieces together, not to play God, but to listen more deeply to the language of the past, to hear what life once said, and what it still longs to say. And what it says is this: life remembers not in thought, but in code, in spirals, in strands, in the quiet architecture of a creature that should not be here, yet is. And that memory is now part of our future. The dire wolf's genome may one day be used to help other canines, to protect wolves still fighting to survive, to strengthen endangered breeds, to guide medicine and science in directions once thought impossible. And in this way, the dire wolf gives more than its presence. It gives its legacy, carved not in stone, but in the double helix, in the silent, sacred code that flows through its blood. So sleep now. Let your thoughts drift, like loose strands through the spiral of time. Let your mind rest in the quiet hum of what life remembers. The dire wolf does not speak, but its genome does, and through that language, it will be heard again, and again. In every great return, there is an echo, not just in the land, not only in the forest, but in the human heart. We may bring back the dire wolf with science, with planning, with careful steps. But it is not only biology that shifts. We shift to dot, because when something ancient moves again, so do we. The resurrection of the dire wolf is not a story of wolves alone. It is a story of us, of what we lost, of what we dared to try, of what we believed could never walk again, until it did. And that belief changes us. It awakens something we forgot we were capable of. Reverence, not just for the wild, but for time itself. For the long arc of memory that stretches behind and ahead of us. For the fragile beauty of a world where life can vanish, and where, just maybe, it can return. The dire wolf was never ours to own, but now it walks beside us, and in that closeness, something human begins to soften. We are a species of builders, of planners, of shapers, but also of storytellers. And this, the return of a creature lost for 10,000 years, becomes one of our greatest stories. It becomes more than data, more than headlines. It becomes myth in motion, a tale passed from lips to ears, from wonder to wonder. Children grow up knowing that extinction does not always mean the end. Writers begin to dream of forests filled with howls, once silenced. Artists paint wolves larger than life, not to frighten, but to honor. And elders remember the silence that came before. Now filled again with breath and motion and voice, we begin to change how we see the world, not as something beneath us, but as something beside us. Because when you bring a creature back from the edge of nothing, you cannot help but feel a weight, not of guilt, but of gratitude. The dire wolf did not demand to return. We asked it to. We reached into frozen bones, into fragmented genes, into the slow turning of history, and pulled a spark from the ashes. And in doing so, we made a promise to care, to protect, to learn, and to remember that the wild is not something to be conquered, but something to be kept alive. For many, the dire wolf becomes more than animal. It becomes symbol of resilience, of humility, of second chances. We begin to look at extinction differently, not as fate, but as warning and as invitation to live more carefully, to build more wisely, to choose preservation over convenience. The echo grows from forests to classrooms, from documentaries to quiet conversations, from a howl in the night to the stillness of someone listening and realizing we can be better. The dire wolf does not ask us to save the world. It asks us to pay attention, to hear the song of life, not only in birds and trees and rivers, but in bones once silent, in creatures once gone, in stories once ended, now reopened. And that echo is not soft. It rings through everything, through how we plan, how we parent, how we walk in nature, how we speak of what matters. The dire wolf changes the human story, not with drama, but with presence. It teaches without teaching. It simply exists. And in that existence, it reminds us of what is possible, that healing takes time, that wonder can return, that the wild is not a place, it is a way of seeing, a way of living, a way of remembering. We are not the center, but a part of something far greater. So sleep. Now, let the echo move through you like wind through pine. Let the human story slow, quiet, deepen. The dire wolf has returned, but so have you. Returned to a quieter way of seeing. Returned to the wild thread within. Returned to the echo of what it means to be truly alive. In every great return, there is an echo, not just in the land, not only in the forest, but in the human heart. We may bring back the dire wolf with science, with planning, with careful steps, but it is not only biology that shifts. We shift to dot, because when something ancient moves again, so do we. The resurrection of the dire wolf is not a story of wolves alone. It is a story of us, of what we lost, of what we dared to try, of what we believed could never walk again, until it did. And that belief changes us. It awakens something we forgot we were capable of. Reverence, not just for the wild, but for time itself, for the long arc of memory that stretches behind and ahead of us, for the fragile beauty of a world where life can vanish, and where, just maybe, it can return. The dire wolf was never ours to own, but now it walks beside us, and in that closeness, something human begins to soften. We are a species of builders, of planners, of shapers, but also of storytellers. And this, the return of a creature lost for 10,000 years, becomes one of our greatest stories. It becomes more than data, more than headlines. It becomes myth in motion, a tale passed from lips to ears, from wonder to wonder. Taught children grow up knowing that extinction does not always mean the end. Writers begin to dream of forests filled with howls once silenced. Artists paint wolves larger than life, not to frighten, but to honor. And elders remember the silence that came before. Now filled again with breath and motion and voice, we begin to change how we see the world, not as something beneath us, but as something beside us. Because when you bring a creature back from the edge of nothing, you cannot help but feel a weight, not of guilt, but of gratitude. The dire wolf did not demand to return. We asked it to. We reached into frozen bones, into fragmented genes, into the slow turning of history, and pulled a spark from the ashes. And in doing so, we made a promise to care, to protect, to learn, and to remember that the wild is not something to be conquered, but something to be kept alive. For many, the dire wolf becomes more than animal. It becomes symbol of resilience, of humility, of second chances. We begin to look at extinction differently, not as fate, but as warning and as invitation to live more carefully, to build more wisely, to choose preservation over convenience. The echo grows from forests to classrooms, from documentaries to quiet conversations, from a howl in the night to the stillness of someone listening and realizing we can be better. The dire wolf does not ask us to save the world. It asks us to pay attention, to hear the song of life, not only in birds and trees and rivers, but in bones once silent, in creatures once gone, in stories once ended, now reopened. And that echo is not soft. It rings through everything, through how we plan, how we parent, how we walk in nature, how we speak of what matters. The dire wolf changes the human story, not with drama, but with presence. It teaches without teaching. It simply exists. And in that existence, it reminds us of what is possible, that healing takes time, that wonder can return, that the wild is not a place, it is a way of seeing, a way of living, a way of remembering we are not the center, but a part of something far greater. So sleep now. Let the echo move through you like wind through pine. Let the human story slow, quiet, deepen. The dire wolf has returned, but so have you. Returned to a quieter way of seeing, returned to the wild thread within, returned to the echo of what it means to be truly alive. The past has returned. The howl that once faded into silence now echoes again between the trees. The dire wolf walks, breathes, lives. But the world it returns to is not the same. It is a world in motion, in tension. A world warmer, louder, more fragmented than the one it left behind. And ahead of it is the cold future, not cold in temperature, but in certainty, because we do not know what lies ahead. The forests shrink, then regrow. The rivers shift their flow. Storms come harder, seasons blur. The earth, once familiar in its rhythms, now stutters in ways we do not fully understand. And the question rises, can something brought back from a vanished age survive in an age just beginning to unfold? The dire wolf was born of endurance. It lived through ice, through scarcity, through the long night of the Pleistocene. Its bones are records of patience, of power, of adaptation. But this future, the one we now shape, asks for something different. It asks for resilience, for partnership, for a new kind of wildness, not the old chaos, but a wildness shaped by care, by awareness, by choice. And so we watch the wolves, not just to learn from them, but to ask, can they teach us how to move forward? Because they were built for survival, and so are we. But survival alone is not enough anymore. we must learn to survive together. The dire wolves are not relics, they are signals. Signs that life is still reaching forward. That the thread of existence, once frayed, can be tied again. Not perfectly, not seamlessly, but tightly enough to hold. The cold future may bring more than wind. It may bring loss, heat. The dire wolf finds its place, not at the top, not alone, but within ecosystems learning to heal, within landscapes being rewoven, within stories where the earth becomes not a resource, but a relationship. The wolves will change, too. They will shift their ranges, their coats will adapt, their diets may broaden, and their blood, the ancient code that once lived in silence, will begin to write new lines, new traits, new futures. They are not frozen in time. They are part of time again. And because they are, we begin to see possibility in our own path. Because if they can return, if they can rise from bone and memory into breath and howl, then perhaps we can rise to dot from habits that harm, from divisions that deepen, from forgetting what matters most. The wolves do not preach, they do not plan, but they move through the world with purpose. They hunt, they protect, they raise young, they live by the oldest law, pay attention or perish. And in watching them, we begin to listen to each other, to the land, to the parts of ourselves that still remember what it means to live in rhythm. The cold future does not have to be lonely. It can be shared with wolves, with trees, with stories, whispered slowly beneath a night sky, still full of stars. And so we prepare, not with fear, but with care. We protect corridors of wild. We study the changes in soil and sky. We learn not only how to preserve what we have, but how to welcome what returns. Because this is not just the resurrection of one species, it is the resurrection of relationship. The wolves walk with us now, not behind us, not beneath us, but beside us, a symbol, a signal, a companion in a future still unfolding. So rest now, let your thoughts move like a slow wind across the new earth. Let the howl of the past guide you through what's coming. The dire wolf has survived once before, and now, as we face the long road ahead, it may show us how to survive again, together. There comes a moment, at the edge of every story, when the voices grow quiet, when the dust settles, when the wind slows, just enough to let the stillness speak. And in that stillness, we hear what truly matters, not the noise of discovery, not the echoes of debate, but the simple, soft sound of presence. The dire wolf is here, now alive, not as a memory, not as a theory, but as breath in the cold, as tracks in the snow, as eyes in the dusk. And in that return, a long-forgotten circle begins to close. Because this was never just about wolves, it was about remembrance, about RECONNECTION, about rewriting the ending we once accepted as final. The last howl is not a cry of ending. It is not sorrow. It is not farewell. It is release, a long, rising breath into a world that once held it, and now holds it again. It echoes through a valley still recovering from the silence. It rolls across pine-covered hills that have grown quiet and full again. It moves through the bones of trees and the shadows of clouds. It is not a sound of conquest. It is not loud. It is not afraid. It simply is. And in being, it teaches that extinction is not the only outcome, that absence is not the same as loss, that life, when held with care, can surprise even the ones who gave it back. The dire wolf does not know what it means to be legendary. It does not walk for applause. It walks because the forest needs footsteps, because the deer need balance, because the land needs rhythm. It walks because it can, and because we, with all our faults, our questions, our reaching hands, believed that it should. We believed in return, and now it walks. The howl fades into silence again, but it is a different silence now. Not the kind that comes after disappearance, but the kind that comes after understanding, when the story doesn't need more words to be felt, when the message lingers, not in speech, but in breath. You do not need to see the wolf to know it is there. You do not need to hear the howl to feel the world. Listening, it lives now in the forest, in the genome, in the lineage, continuing far beyond us, and also quietly. It lives in you, in the part of you that remembers what it means to belong to the wild, to the long thread of life that loops and tangles and weaves back again, to the old songs rising from the earth, not in language, but in feeling. So sleep now. Let the story close, not with a door, but with an open sky. Let your breath fall into rhythm with the wild once more. The dire wolf has returned, not to rule, not to haunt, but simply to be, and in that being, something ancient has come home. The last howl has been heard, and still it echoes on.